This episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/SBO. Terms and conditions apply.
This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm your host, Mac Pritchard. I'm also the founder of Mac's List. It's a job board in the Pacific Northwest that helps you find a fulfilling career. Every Wednesday, I talk to a different expert about the tools you need to get the work you want. When you find a job where you feel comfortable, you're more productive and connected to your work and your colleagues. Jessica Conn is here to talk about why culture fit matters and how to address it in your job search. She's the Human Resources Manager at Oregon AFSCME Council 75. It's one of Oregon's fastest growing unions and represents more than 33,000 workers. Jessica joins us from Portland, Oregon. Well, let's jump right into it, Jessica. What does culture fit mean exactly?
I think culture fit is really just the relationship that happens not only between an employee and employer, but it can also happen in teams. It really drives where the whole organization goes and how everything trickles down from there. There's this concept of, screening folks for that culture fit, and really what folks are looking for is something based on the alignment of values, beliefs, or behaviors that's really going to mesh well with the team.
Sometimes when I talk to job seekers and culture fit comes up, candidates can get frustrated because they hear that from a hiring manager, well, it wasn't a good fit. And sometimes applicants don't know what that means exactly. Do you think that employers and job seekers understand culture fit in the same way?
I don't think they do. I really think it's a case-by-case basis. What I can say broadly is employers typically have something that's really hard to describe when they talk to someone, which is kind of this gut feeling of the conversation's flowing really well, this person's hitting on key points, maybe intentionally or accidentally, but in a way that really just makes that person memorable. And I think an easy way you can put that into more of a formula is doing your research ahead of time about the employer. Did you look onto their website, find what their mission statement was, maybe some recent events? All of that can really give a large, broad picture of what is important to an employer. And then what you need to do is ask yourself, how does that relate to you? And you can even ask this question in an interview. What is the value add? How would I be a culture fit to the team?
Talk more about that because, as you said, I think some applicants think that culture fit and talking about it can be a mysterious, unknowable process. So you mentioned the importance of doing research, asking questions about culture fit in an interview. What else, when employers are thinking about culture fit, matters to that hiring manager that a candidate should be aware of?
Sure. I think you're going to be on the lookout for some really key words. When you're thinking about culture of where you're going, you're sitting in the interviewee seat, you're thinking, are you using phrases like a culture of communication, a culture of transparency? That's more of a green flag for an applicant. When you're hearing things like such as we're a family here, it tends to give me pause on what that relationship means. As an employer, if you're talking to someone and an employer is interviewing, they're typically looking for someone who maybe has the right work ethic for that position. And that's really tailored to two things. It's tailored to the position itself. Are we talking about an accountant? Are we talking about a manufacturing worker? Those are very different things. but also just a sense of, oh, this person gets it. You find that more in mission-driven organizations. Oh, they're really passionate about our mission. Oh, they're really passionate about where we're going or the work. That, I think, is what tends to catch folks' attention when you're trying to capture this sort of invisible and omnipresent essence of culture that a lot of folks don't have a good answer to.
I love that phrase you used a moment ago, that an employer might think while listening to a candidate, this person gets it. They understand us. Talk more about what a candidate can do to unravel that mystery. Though you mentioned looking at a website, paying attention to mission and values. What else have you seen as a hiring manager? Have you seen applicants do that demonstrate they understand the culture of an organization and they're excited about it?
Yeah, I look for evidence that they've done their research somewhat recently. So that can look like, as I mentioned before, going to a website. That's not just that piece of it, though. There's social media, there's news articles, there's events. All of that can really demonstrate what an organization has been doing in the community. Perhaps you're looking at a larger corporation position, and yet you can see that this corporation has been a sponsor for certain events that's very important to them. Or you're at a mission-driven organization and you can see, oh, they just had their annual fundraiser, they've raised X amount of dollars for their mission. That's really important to them. Or they've had events where they're asking for donations from like a clothing drive. I think it's really attention grabbing when an applicant is in the interview and they're able to kind of reference right off the bat some relevant information, not necessarily reading back information, but understanding that they've digested it. Oh, I've seen you in the community doing this. That's really important to me. Oh, I've noticed that you've invested in X, Y, and Z. That's amazing. Here's why it's important to me. Really tying the work back to yourself and vice versa is very important for doing those first steps of relationship building.
I want to go back to a point you made at the start of our conversation, an employer who says we're a family. And I think I heard you say that was a red flag. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, it tends to be a red flag because I tend to see that phrase being used to describe a unspoken expectation that your first priority is that position because that's your family. I think it used to maybe refer to family businesses or we had good relationships. More often than not, when that phrase comes up, I see it being a little bit more on the toxic side of things of we're so invested in this, or we kind of have this unspoken expectation of overworking yourself or working 50, 60-hour weeks being salaried or something like that. So I think that's really important to keep your radar up, if you will, or listen to that gut feeling. It's really hard when you're looking for a job search. I haven't met many who enjoy putting themselves out there repeatedly. And typically job seekers are under this sense of urgency. And so they start to ignore, oh, well, that's probably not a big deal. Oh, that might have given me pause, but I'm just going to look past that. And that's where you really want to caution people to check their sense of urgency and what really matters to them, because your own values misaligning with the company's culture is going to be kind of a recipe for disaster in the long run.
I want to take a break right now, but when we come back, I want to talk more about why culture fit matters to employers, but also why job seekers should make this a priority when they're looking for their next position. So stay with us. When we return, Jessica Conn will continue to share her advice on why culture fit matters and how to address it in your job search. You say you learn a new language every year, but few of us actually commit to it. Babbel makes it easy for you to learn one in less time than you think. This year, speak like a whole new you with Babbel. the language learning app that gets you talking. In October, I'm going to Italy for a week for a silent film festival in the city of Pordenone. Babbel is helping me learn the basic phrases I need to talk with locals and find my way around this medieval city. Learn everything you need for your own travels, from vocabulary to culture, while holding your own in conversation with others. With Babbel, it takes only 10 minutes a day. Babbel is gifting our listeners 60% off subscriptions at babbel.com/dreamjob. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/dreamjob. Spelled BABBEL.com/dreamjob. Babbel.com/dreamjob. Rules and restrictions may apply. Have you ever been asked this in a job interview? Tell me about a time when you didn't agree with your boss. What would you say? This is what's called a behavioral interview question, and it's a common tactic. Employers use this kind of question to explore your fit for a job based on your past experience. It can be an easy question to answer if you have the right strategy. I show you how to answer these gotcha questions in our free Max List guide, 100 Behavioral Interview Questions You Need to Know. To get your copy, visit maxlist.org/questions. You'll also learn 4 simple steps for answering any behavioral interview question. Again, that's maxlist.org/questions. You can count on getting these questions in your next interview. Why not get the answers before you walk into the interview room? Go to maxlist.org/questions.
Build a routine with Ollie that supports your wellness needs, like getting your daily vitamins and minerals with Ollie's multi-gummies, or keeping your mood upbeat with all the vitamin D in Hello Happy. Give your gut health some support with probiotics, and wake up feeling refreshed after taking Ollie Sleep. Do wellness on your terms. Find Ollie at a Walmart or Target near you or at ollie.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
We're back in the Max List studio. I'm talking with Jessica Conn. She's the Human Resources Manager at Oregon AFSCME Council 75. It's one of Oregon's fastest growing unions and represents more than 33,000 workers. Jessica joins us from Portland, Oregon. Now, Jessica, before the break, we were talking about why culture fit matters and how to address it in your job search. Tell us more about why employers care about culture fit. You walked us through in the first segment, what culture fit is, what employers are listening for when talking to candidates, how candidates might prepare for those conversations. But why does this matter so much, both to employers and I'd like to talk about why it matters to job seekers too.
Yeah, really, at the end of the day, both parties want this relationship to work out. The applicant wants to be the person who sticks, and the employer wants to find someone who can enmesh with the team and certainly doesn't want to start the process all over again. Bad culture fit is a bad deal for everyone. A hire that doesn't stick can cost the employer roughly 30% of that annual salary if they leave around day 60. And not only that, you have a decrease in team morale. They've gotten to know someone. Maybe they were excited about this person, or maybe it was kind of starting off on the wrong foot from the get-go, and then you've had a month plus of kind of a tumultuous relationship. And if that goes poorly, exit happens, not only are we out the salary as an employer, the applicant now has either an awkward employment listed on their resume, or they leave it off and then there's an employment gap to explain. It's a lose-lose situation. So ultimately, we want to do the best that we can do during that interview on both sides of the table to really get to know the other person, to really get to know the employer. Why is this person interested in this position? And how everyone fits together nicely.
In the first segment, you mentioned one of the red flags a candidate might pay attention to is an employer who says, we're all a family here. Are there other red flags related to culture fit that either candidates or employers pay attention to that you've seen stand out?
Sure. As an employer, I don't know if it's necessarily a bad culture fit. I can tell you that it is always not a great first impression when someone's ill prepared to receive a phone call. What I mean by that is most jobs want to see someone exhibit some sense of organization, commitment right off the bat. And the applicant can prepare themselves by doing their homework on their applications. Beyond what I mentioned in terms of researching the employer, it's also keeping yourself organized. I'd have a hard time thinking of any position that doesn't require some level of organization, and you can demonstrate that as an applicant by keeping track of where you've applied, when, what the position was. That can be as simple as utilizing a spreadsheet to organize your thoughts, to know who you've spoken to, or maybe know what jobs are already off the table. That way, when you pick up the phone, you're immediately ready. Oh, yes, you're calling from this place. I'm so excited to talk with you. Here's why I'm excited for that position. And you may even catch that either recruiter or HR manager or hiring manager, you may catch them off guard in a good way. Like, wow, this person's really prepared to have a conversation. As an applicant talking with employers and looking for more of those either yellow or red flags, I would say mass exit of leadership is always going to be a little bit of a yellow or red flag. Mass restructuring, although sometimes it's very beneficial, coming in right when it's happened can be very difficult to navigate a position. And just overall, maybe some instability related to either of what I mentioned or something else where, oh, we're so excited. We've hired a brand new team, which is really exciting. I think folks just need to keep their expectations in mind that anytime there's a new anything, there's a lot of front work to happen in order to implement whatever that might be, new leadership, new systems, new policies, what have you. It's not always a red flag, but it can be a yellow flag.
How do you suss that out if you're an applicant and you are talking to an employer who's had those kinds of changes, a big change in leadership or new program, a new team? How do you know it's an opportunity and not a snake pit?
I think being direct is actually encouraged in this particular situation. Say you are interviewing with the hiring manager, they mentioned that they have a brand new corporate structure or they have brand new leadership. It's really okay to ask a clarifying question. Maybe preface it with, oh, that sounds really new and exciting. That sounds really interesting. May I ask what spawned this new structure? What encouraged the new policies? How did that come about? Any form of that question, I think, is more than appropriate because you're doing your due diligence as a person to figure out, is this where I want to be for the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, let's talk more about the job seeker's perspective when it comes to culture fit. What can happen both in your job search and your career, Jessica, if you don't pay attention to culture fit?
You may find yourself in an employment situation that perhaps you weren't prepared for or starts to bleed into other aspects of your life. Perhaps you started a position, there's that honeymoon period that happens of this is great, it's new and exciting, we have lots of good feelings and just overall dopamine about this new experience. And then once we start to come off of that and start to get more into the month 3, 4, 5, and the more routine parts of the job come out and the more routine parts of the culture come out, and you start to realize, I'm not in a good spot. And then that sense of urgency comes back that you maybe just got away from by getting this position. Perhaps a sense of dread can settle in, and then your overall morale can drop, the team can drop, or maybe it already was and you didn't notice it. You start to ask yourself, where am I going to go with this? Am I going to put my head down and get a minimum of 2 years on my resume? and just push through? Is there a way to maybe try to shift part of some more smaller, more achievable parts of culture? Maybe inter-team communication just needs a little bit of fine-tuning. But if there's massive overarching culture issues, you really have to ask yourself, what's my timeline? Because you can't control an entire organization's culture.
So we talked in the first segment about what candidates can do to understand how culture matters to employers, and you mentioned researching websites, learning about missions and values. But what about the job seeker themselves? How do you recommend a candidate get clear about the work culture you want when you're looking for work? What steps have you seen be effective?
I think the most effective thing you can do is look for a job the same way you might look for somewhere to live. You need to know your must-haves, your nice-to-haves, and your non-negotiables. And it's easy to say when you're employed, say you're gainfully employed and you're looking to make maybe a more slow switch. It's not quite as easy to say when perhaps you've been laid off, you're in an urgent situation, and you start to kind of negotiate with yourself, like, oh, is that really a must-have? Maybe that non-negotiable's a little too much. I really encourage folks, as much as they possibly can, taking into account that you have to pay your bills at the end of the day, to keep your values in check. Know what your values are. Maybe even do a values exercise that I've been led through before. It's very helpful. Identify what those are, how that ties to a position, and don't budge as much as you can. Because the minute that you start having what's called a values violation, as I've learned from other career coaches, is you start to be affected, and ultimately your happiness is on the line.
Well, it's been a terrific conversation, Jessica. Now, tell us what's next for you.
For me, my goal being in human resources is to reframe exactly what human resources means. I want to emphasize the resource portion of my job title, encouraging an HR culture shift into being the place to ask questions, seek resources, and I encourage all HR leaders to come to the field with an open mind, be approachable, and navigate those difficult situations with empathy while communicating the reality of any given situation.
Well, I know that listeners can learn more about you and your work by visiting the Oregon AFSCME website. That URL is www.oregonafscme.org. Now, Jessica, given all the great advice you've shared today, what's the one thing you want a listener to remember about why culture fit matters and how to address it in your job search?
The takeaway I want anyone to get from this podcast is to be an advocate for yourself and know where your values are. And don't be afraid to ask questions as they pertain to any of the things that we've talked about today.
Next week, our guest will be Kristen McConnell. She's the Chief Operating Officer at Mulberry Talent Partners. It's a boutique recruiting agency that helps employers and candidates find the perfect match. A job search can take several months or even longer, and as time passes, you may need a mid-course correction. Join us next Wednesday when Kristen McConnell and I talk about when and how to revisit your job search goals. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job. This show is produced by Max List. Susan Thornton Hoff schedules our guests and writes our newsletter. Lisa Kislenberry Anderson manages our social media. Our sound engineer and editor is Matt Fiorillo. Dawn Mole creates our transcripts, and our music is by Freddie Trujillo. This is Mac Pritchard. See you next week.